Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 6:30.
WMAL.
7:06 on the Morning Majority, and we have Joe DiGenova, our favorite legal expert, on the phone with us this morning. How you doing, Joe?
Doing great. Today is my 30th wedding anniversary.
Hey, congratulations. And they said it wouldn't
I don't
last.
know how my wife, Victoria, has put up with me for 30 years, but she has.
Very cool. Speaking of romantic marriages,
Thank you.
I hear that the Supreme Court had something to say about Anna Nicole's marriage
Yes,
this week.
last week, in a little noticed ruling, actually, Anna Nicole Smith's estate lost big. This case has been up to the Supreme Court 3 times, which is remarkable for any case. But the Supreme Court actually struck down part of the bankruptcy law, which you couldn't find anything in the papers about this, barely. It was all about Anna Nicole Smith and the children and the family and all that. At any rate, she lost big, and she doesn't get $400 million. It all now goes to the sons and nephews and family of Mr. Marshall, who died, shortly after meeting her. But this was a big deal because in the body of the opinion, the Supreme Court actually struck down part of the bankruptcy law, which Congress enacted in 1984 through amendments. And they basically said, you're entitled to a state court trial in a case involving important issues. In this case, this was the will of Howard Marshall, which a bankruptcy court in California, nowhere near Texas, actually threw out his wishes and gave $400 million to Anna Nicole Smith for no good reason. And finally, the Supreme Court threw up its hands and said, this is not what bankruptcy courts are supposed to do, and finally set straight a horrible, horrible miscarriage of justice. And I'm happy because Howard Stern will not get a dime.
Violent video games, the Supreme Court is taking up this case,
Yes.
which would ban the sale of violent video games to kids.
Yes.
I think it would result in a fine, maybe $1,000 for
Right.
the store that sells the game to minors. Game makers and the stores argue that it's a First Amendment issue, but if you could pass a law that prohibits the sale of alcohol and cigarettes to those under 18, why couldn't you ban a game?
Well, there's a little difference because a game involves free speech. It involves expression. It's an idea. It's a product. It's a book. And the Supreme Court has been pretty tough on this kind of thing. And my guess is that they are going to strike down this California law. And by the way, most games are bought by people 33 years old and older. It's quite remarkable statistics. I've looked into this over a period of time because I became interested in the video game stuff because it is fascinating material. I do, however, believe that video games and violent movies do have an influence on kids, and it's quite clear, otherwise advertising would not exist. That's what advertising is. It's designed to affect the behavior of people, and these video games can do that. But I think the Supreme Court's going to say that's for parents and adults to figure out how to control their children. We're not going to limit free speech here.
But we do ban kids from seeing rated R movies, right?
That's true. We do that. Pornography and obscenity enjoy a special place in American culture, and violence does too. Only violence is more positive in American culture.
Well, I'm surprised to hear you say that because I thought that the Supreme Court. I mean, we'll wait to see how they rule on this, but they would say
they
would.
may very well say that California has the right to do this, but in the case of something that is not there's no statistical data that shows that these things are theoretically going to be any more harmful than other things. They can influence behavior. I'm a great believer in the fact that people should monitor their children's behavior to the extent that that's humanly possible in the modern world. But this does involve a product that is an expressive idea. It is like a book. It is like a movie. It is like that. And the statistics that do exist show that most of the purchases here are for people 33 years and older. So it's very, very difficult for the court to get into this and start trying to figure out ways to cut back free speech things. This is a toughie, but I think they're going to rule against California state legislatures.
Well, as a legal analyst, I want you to weigh in on what has happened with the law in New York regarding same-sex marriage. It is now legal there,
Right.
and the governor has signed it into law.
Right.
I note, looking though, that some 40 states either have either gay marriage is either constitutionally banned or it's banned by law, and that there are also several of the states that have passed it where there's going to be an effort to repeal it. I think in Rhode Island there's talk that it might be repealed. In Iowa, where it became became law through a judicial order, they basically got rid of those judges in the next election.
Right. Well,
New York is not in sync with many parts of the country. Would you agree?
Well, I don't. It doesn't matter whether New York is in sync, because this is exactly what federalism is all about. This is what states' rights are about. This is the way abortion should have been handled, not the way Harry Blackmun did in Roe versus Wade. This is a given state saying the states traditionally control marriage. New York State, by legislation, not by judicial fiat, not by a sitting judge, not by the Supreme Court of New York State, but by a legislature. Elected people said, we're going to allow gay marriage. I have no problem with that. I do have a problem with courts ruling that gay marriage is a constitutional right under equal protection. And I think, by the way, when the California case gets to the Supreme Court, I actually think gay marriage is going to lose in the Supreme Court. I think that issue, I think people made a terrible mistake litigating that question. But I do think New York has every right in the world to do this. And, we could end up with a patchwork. Some states allow it, some states don't. And that's what federalism is all about. I have no problem with state legislatures doing things.
So on a states' rights point of view, you believe this is okay?
Well, and you have to view it that way. Otherwise, you're a phony.
And, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but what happened in California was that they actually amended the state constitution, and then a judge decided that you can't amend the state constitution. Basically, what happened.
What they did was they had, one of their great, public votes,
right.
Initiatives and referendum in California is part of their state constitution. A court, the state Supreme Court, ruled gay marriage constitutional and legal in California. The referendum then came in, and by a very large majority, the people of California struck down the gay marriage bill. Then a group of litigants sued in United States District Court, and a federal judge struck it down, announcing later, after he retired from the federal bench, that he himself was in a committed long-term homosexual relationship, throwing that whole thing into a tizzy, but actually having no legal effect whatsoever.
Right.
And that case is in the Ninth Circuit and will eventually go to the Supreme Court.
All right, we were talking last week, and I don't know if this has actually gone anywhere since then, but Texas was discussing passing a law that essentially would make it a crime for TSA to touch you in your private areas.
Right.
And I was concerned because I thought that maybe, you need the TSA to be able to do those things, and I was uneasy with arresting a TSA agent for doing his or her job. I'm curious as to get your take on that and whether or not there needs to be some kind of uniform umbrella for TSA agents across the country if they're actually going to do these things.
Well, first of all, TSA agents are covered by federal law, and they cannot be arrested for doing their jobs. If states try to do that, those cases will be what is called removed to federal court. In other words, the case will be taken from a state court, sent to a federal court, where it will be officially dismissed by a federal judge. As long as they are acting under color of law, and it is federal law, and the federal law gives them the power to do this, no state can prohibit this conduct, because the federal government has preempted states from legislating in the area of security at airports. Now, they may say, well, we have the right to define an assault. They do not have a right to define an assault if that assault conflicts with the definition of pat-down in federal law. And that is exactly what Texas has tried to do. By the way, I'm very sympathetic. I think the story of the 95-year-old woman today is ludicrous. This is the incompetence of TSA people, and I don't mean the agents. They're doing what they're told. This is Janet Napolitano's pat-down. That's the way you look at this. She is she's got to be one of the worst Homeland Security people we've ever had, and she's totally inarticulate about the role that TSA plays in a safe society. She should be all over this like a cheap suit, but you know what? It's like everybody in that. She doesn't want to own this, so she's going to allow some underling to take the heat on the pat-down of this 95-year-old woman. This is disgraceful. This is the lack of discretion. This is idiocy. What they should be doing is, you do what you do in Israel. You take somebody like that aside, you sit down, you talk with them, you make a judgment and say, guess what, guys, we're not going to do this. Let her go through.
All right.
None of that happens because they want to protect themselves from lawsuits against discrimination.
All right. On your 30th anniversary, what are you guys doing tonight? You got any special plans, special dinner?
We are in St. Michael's for a long weekend, and tonight we're going to have a very special dinner here on the beautiful waters of the Chesapeake.
That sounds very romantic.
Yeah,
You're a splendid guy.
Victoria will have a wonderful time, I promise.
Well, congratulations to you and Victoria. That's
Thanks,
great.
Guys.
30 years strong.
Yeah.
7:15, Joe DiGenova, our legal expert here with the Morning Majority.